This is Larp Chat Live. We cover a variety of different topics that are relevant to Larp development and the Larp community. My name is Jessica. I've been with doing Larp organizing for about 15 years. I'm also founder of Larp Boss. And with us today are our two co-hosts, Tara and Maury. So Tara, let's start with you. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Tara Clapper, and I am also known now as LARP Mentor. I do some one-on-one mentorship with anybody looking to get into LARP design and development. And I'm excited to talk all about this whole de-rolling and debrief process, which, even though I've been LARPing for over a decade, is something I've only been doing for a few years. So I'm really excited to dive in.
All right, perfect. And Maury, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Your resume seems to be a lot larger than ours.
Because I'm older, Jessica.
Not
Sarah.
that much older.
Yeah, see, when you add years to life, you add years to experience. So,
Not that much older.
hmm, I'm Mari Brown, and I own Learn LARP and Snow Dragon Games, and we produce um, LARP activities and LARP educational experiences, and do LARP consulting for museums and companies. And I've been doing lots of work on de-rolling and debriefing because it's becoming more and more important, I think, as things like medical simulations and disaster simulations and other things are becoming more mainstream. People are realizing that the importance of getting into character, which they realized before,
Hmm.
there's an importance to also getting out of character. So um, I suppose I'm ready to go too.
Got it. So you used two terms that our audience may not be familiar with, de-rolling and debriefing. So tell us a little bit more about what those terms actually mean.
It's Jess's role to make Mari define her terms.
Yes, it is my role.
Um, so de-rolling is kind of like what it sounds like. It's getting out of character,
Hmm.
putting away the role, switching from the headspace of the character that you were portraying to returning to your general basic identity, putting that aside. And it usually involves certain things like recognizing that you are no longer the character and pushing
Hmm.
that and some things to separate that because they can bleed into each other as you are acting. And debriefing is a activity that usually comes after de-rolling. So we sort of separate ourselves, and then debriefing is let's process this experience. Let's talk about what happened, talk about things that worked well, talk about things that didn't work so well, talk about some feelings that we might have, talk about some regrets maybe, just sort of, wow, that was really intense. How do I leave that behind and intellectualize it? Because really intense experiences are really felt. And when we LARP, um, our body doesn't think, it's pretend, right? Our body
Hmm.
is producing adrenaline, our body is producing pheromones, our body is our body's crying, right? Even if we're acting crying, right? And
Hmm.
so processing those things is super important. And so they kind of go hand in hand, but they are
Hmm.
separate.
Yeah, they definitely do sound separate. And I know before the show we were actually talking about the importance of this, especially in this day and age where we're having a lot more LARPs come out that are simulationist or deal with what's now being known as more controversial topics. So things that deal with trauma, things that may deal with different levels of oppression or marginalization. Um, Things that deal with romance or other basically taboo topics. And the people I actually had was on a Facebook discussion a couple of days ago, where someone brought up the topic or the idea we should completely ban these from all LARPs is not acceptable at all. And one of the commenters actually pulled a lot of parallels from the kink community and kink practices into safer LARP practices. So LARP cannot be 100% safe, but there are practices out there within the kink and BDSM community which can actually carry over to help deal with a lot of the emotional bleed and a lot of the feelings that happen and the emotional drop that can happen after some emotionally intense LARP activities. Do either of you want to talk a bit more about that?
I'll go briefly. I don't have like as much of a breadth of experience in really either of those categories in terms of, you know, the debriefing and derolling, or, you know, the kink and BDSM scene. But I will say I recently participated in Pandemonium at HLGCon, which I was kind of there and setting stuff up when the both of you ran the preview. And even though I had a hand in the design process and was aware of what the other designers were doing, I had a really surprising scene. And just kind of a content warning for anyone watching: if you have a sensitivity to talk about like, you know, murdering and death or asphyxiation, that's where I'm going with it. I won't be too graphic, but my character did die towards the end of that LARP. And I personally have a fear of asphyxiation because I've had some really bad experiences. And the really bad experience that I had with it was kind of unwanted in a like sexual situation and in real life. And so for me to kind of go there in the LARP and communicate, you know, effectively with the other role players was really something. And I've never done anything like that or in my role play. And this was like a big ritual in the middle of the room. This wasn't like a private scene or anything like that. But it really went there, you know, like that's how the character died. But there was like this like kind of kink crossover component to it, I guess. And it was very new for me on many levels, and it was something that I was previously extremely uncomfortable with, and also probably something I won't do again. But I was very comfortable in the moment, and I was very comfortable as I debriefed about it later. And really, I just found so much overlap unexpectedly that I found that kind of the debriefing process to really work well. And I conducted a formal debrief, which, you know, is a whole nother thing, because when you're facilitating it, you can participate, but you're not really supposed to make yourself the focus. And then I got to have a lot more informal debrief after, where I spoke to the other people who were involved in the scene after they said it was okay to kind of proceed and talk and lay out those emotions. And that really helped me a lot as well. So just in that brief experience, the crossover to me was really new and shocking. And that's a pretty raw experience. That was just a couple weeks ago. But I've only been doing formal and structured debrief for the last couple of years. So, and I've only been leading them for like less than a year. So it was pretty intense, and the crossover was completely shocking. And it seemed like it kind of clicked and made sense for me when that scene happened and when the debrief happened as well.
Okay, got it. And
You bring
Martin,
up some, I'll just jump in. Tara brings up some really good points there. First of all, that these can be shocking or surprising, completely unplanned for, right? Even in fluffy games, like you were talking about some of these topics that, you know, people were saying maybe these topics should be banned. And there's a couple of things that are going on there, is that if people consider LARP a game, then the notion of a game causes people to think, well, certain things are too serious for games. But if you consider LARP an experience, an immersive experience, and not a game, right? Especially these kinds of LARPs that don't have points and aren't a zero sum, aren't attempting to have winners and losers, they're much more of a theatrical experience. We can open that up to, hey, these topics are not off limits. We're not making light of them. We're not turning them into a game. We are exploring them artistically and immersively, and we need to have those tools to deal with them. So, but in the case of, if we even with that, even if a LARP is supposed to be about cartoon characters who are, you know, who who are having a musical jam, right? And like it's going to be super light and fluffy. These scenes can come up, or these feelings can come up that are almost, I don't know, Tara, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's almost like a hijacking that can take place. You're like, whoa, you know, they just take over in a sort of bodily and embodied and, you know, emotionally psychological way.
Yeah, especially when you're already super immersed. It's like, you know, I had the back of my mind's like, okay, I'm immersed, I'm playing a character, and also I was kind of like GMing and NPCing, so I was also trying to be aware of, being extra engaging with the players around me. But it was also like it was just this hijacking moment where I was like vaguely aware, but kind of gave myself over to the scene.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And we do, and then after, right? It's after that the rest of some of those things that you might have compartmentalized or done, they ambush you.
Mhm.
And the reason I think debriefing can be super important about that is debriefing with the people who were in the scene with you is super important for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a cognitive thing, right? Like you were there. You were
Mhm.
there, you were with me. I don't have to explain it. I don't have to go
Yeah.
into, right? Like I was doing this thing and people are like, uh-huh, uh-huh. But they already know because they were there. So and people who share an experience with you, like when you build something together like that, you guys have you create bonds among the humans, whether you're really intending to or not. So in addition, you guys made each other feel things, right? And so when you're debriefing with the people who were there, it's useful for everybody, right?
Mhm.
Because you're talking about how you felt and how the other things and the other people are listening and then reflecting on their own feelings, and beginning to unpack them and process them together. And we know this not just in LARP. Like we know, like for example, in military situations or in medical situations or in disaster situations where
Mhm.
a SWAT team goes in and has to take care of something. It's an intense situation, and the people who are in the situation together do debrief. Debrief's a
Mhm.
word that came from the military and it came from corporate, and then of course, and it was typically called aftercare in kink.
Mhm.
And debriefing is hugely important because you're trying to make sense of what happened,
Mhm.
right? And doing it with the group that you were with, each of you is sort of contributing something to that to try to make sense because we all had different impressions and our
Mhm.
feelings might be similar, but they might also be different. And somebody might go, "Whoa, you felt that or you saw that." And gosh, that's not the way I felt it at all. But we are different, unique people. So
Mhm.
one example I like to do is when, here's a birthday party, right? Scene in a LARP. And everybody thinks birthday parties are supposed to be hunky dory and happy, and but you might have trauma over a birthday party, and you might have negative feelings that are associated with it, and that scene might be really hard for you. And if you were debriefing about those feelings that come up, they might be super surprising for someone else, but not wrong or invalid. So um, we could go on about the kink stuff too, but I don't know if you wanted to switch to a different topic or.
I don't know, Tara, what are your thoughts? Should we switch topics?
Yeah, let's move forward. I mean, it like I just don't have a lot of experience to
Mhm.
kind of speak to there. I guess the only other thing I would add is one thing I've learned in different types of relationships, but also including, like romantic relationships and stuff, is the importance of debrief, like well beyond any kind of like bedroom stuff, right? Like
Mhm.
you have an argument, you debrief. You have a really great day and a great experience, and it's like just
Mhm.
an informal like, wow, I really appreciated that day, or I had fun doing this particular thing. Like
Mhm.
that can apply to so many situations outside of the sometimes stigmatized,
Mhm.
kink or like, bedroom situations. And
Mhm.
I think Larp has helped me realize that a lot because there are some scenes that are just, even scenes that make you feel just really warm, fuzzy, and happy that
Mhm.
don't involve anything super intense. But when you get those feelings, it's like, hey, wow, I'd like to feel that again. Why did I like that so much?
Mhm.
It doesn't have to necessarily be anything that you may or may not be comfortable with or you may or may not be familiar with if you're not, into the kink scene. I think that kind of debriefing is still super important. So
Mhm.
it's the one of many ways that you can apply it. It's just that that community has used it in a more established way for longer, and it's a really healthy practice after all sorts of experiences that you have with other people.
Yep. So one question I have, because I know there's probably going to be some people coming in and listening to this and saying, "Hey, this seems like an interesting and cool idea of doing de-rolling and debriefing in my LARP," but there's not really any I don't know how to do it. So, what would be some techniques that someone could start off with as a way of being able to start facilitating those processes within their game?
Well, I can start with de-rolling, and to piggyback on something Tara said just a second ago, which is appreciations. Um, Tara was talking about how it doesn't have to be negative emotions, right? But like if you just want to tell someone thank you for something that they did, or just to say wow,
Hmm.
that was super intense. So appreciations are actually a pretty low barrier to entry way to start debriefing, and sometimes that can get people talking.
Hmm.
So if you just sort of start with, let's talk about something that was awesome and let's try to be specific. So if it's like, Jess, I really appreciate how you are always able to get the tech working on on these things. And then appreciations, A, they feel good. And B, sometimes people are really, I know I'm very guilty of this. I'm not good at taking them and accepting them.
Hmm.
Um, and that's an important part. But de-rolling, one of the easiest things you can do is if your LARP is a LARP where you have a name tag,
Hmm.
is can like sort of everyone go around the circle and take off the name tag, right? Like I am no longer, Susie, I am Mari. And you can even state that. Like you can do something like, I was Susie, I'm Mari, and Mari likes dark chocolate, right?
Hmm.
Like something that is real. If you don't have a name tag, you can do a piece of clothing or an object that is really, really associated with the character. Like, oh, here, I mean, Tara, you talk about this one. I know you're really
Yeah,
good at having.
this one's an interesting one for me because the first time I formally de-rolled that way was at New World Magic School 1, where we had the workshop. Like it was involved in the debriefing where we, left something behind, and a lot of people left something physical behind from their character. Like we all had wands, so that was like a really popular one. And my character wore a hat similar to this, which may be one reason why I purchased this hat. It will appear again. But I tossed my hat into the ring, right, and then into the center of the circle. But I realized kind of after that I had already been doing that just informally because I'd been playing a character in a campaign LARP who wore a mask, and she very rarely took it off because she used to be a fairy, and she thought that mortals were still not worthy of seeing her face even though she was mortal. And I would sleep in the mask at the LARP. Like it was like 24/7. It was really comfortable too. I would sleep in the mask. Nobody really saw my face unless it was like a very rare, meaningful situation. And when the game would end, and I will say game because that LARP is more gamified.
Hmm.
When it would end, I would take off the mask and it would be a huge de-rolling because I mean that was 3 days straight, 2 or 3 days straight,
Hmm.
depending on which game. How long I was wearing that. It was a really big noticeable thing. I
Hmm.
would take it off to like shower and wash my face, but I considered that to be like a private activity for the character, just like it is for me.
Hmm.
Like this is her like private time. And I mean, and that's another weird thing that I've done at that I didn't really think about that I did at that campaign LARP until I played Magic School. It was like even when I was by myself, I was like, this is really sounds really weird, but even when I was by myself, I was still LARPing. I wasn't processing. I was like, my character putting
Hmm.
makeup on and stuff like that. And we don't really think about that and like who talks about like I'm going to the bathroom as my character, like because those are safe out of game spaces usually.
Hmm.
But it's still like those costume pieces they carry through.
Hmm.
And I found that with my magic school character with the hat's the main thing, but like I still LARP like I did an in character room, in agreement with my roommate, and
Hmm.
we LARPed through it. And so like I would take the hat off to go to bed, and I just like I put it by the nightstand, and I woke up and like the first thing I did is I would grab the hat even though I was still wearing pajamas. It's just one of those things where you can just have one or two articles of clothing that really work for it. So that has been a really effective thing for me, and I feel like I also get immersed a lot easier, and I de-roll a lot easier. And the last thing I kind of want to say about it is the removal of something allows you to have a hard break
Mhm.
between I'm in character, I'm out of character. And different people de-roll in different ways. Some people like to do it slowly,
Mhm.
Mhm.
carefully come out of that and make sure they're standing near people that they're out of game friends with when they're de-rolling. I prefer to be like, great, I'm in character, I'm out. Like I like the hard,
Mhm.
abrupt change of that so that I can manage the bleed better. And that's also something worth noting because different people manage it in different ways. And as I've started to transition to also like running these like debriefing workshops, I noticed some people really have a hard time coping with that abrupt change and
Mhm.
other people need the abrupt change. So anything you can do as an organizer to set up a situation where people are permitted to de-roll in their own way or with other people who like to de-roll in the same way is really useful. And I'm still really honestly figuring out how to do that in certain situations because at Dragon Thrones I really noticed some people wanted the switch and
Mhm.
other people needed time. They needed like at least an hour to sit there and kind of come out of character. And I'd really like to kind of organize it next time, at least at Dragon Thrones, where there is a space, like a physical space for people who need that time to de-roll before they really get into talking about the extremely competitive elements of that LARP,
Mhm.
and a different space for people who are like, cool, I'm taking off my tiara, now I'm me again. I think that's really important to
Mhm.
respect that LARPers do that in their own way.
I well, I'm going to stutter. I agree with what you're saying that people do have very different things, but that that physical change, it can be an object. Another thing you can do is we were in this room, like you said, and now we all go to this room, and this room is
Physical location.
yeah, change the location.
Mhm.
You can also do it with lighting or with music. Like I do it in conventions a lot. I try to cut the main room
Mhm.
lights off and I light with special lighting, right? And when the game is over, you flip the main lights on as a environmental shift to say, okay, right? I also think it's important to do two things, which is one, leave the character behind.
Mhm.
But for a lot of people who feel really jarred about that, right, it's because there's a sudden loss, right? There's a sudden absence. And I
Mhm.
think the second part of de-rolling needs to be the reaffirmation, right? Like okay, in real life, I am, right? And I think this can be especially important if you played romantic role play, romantic plot with folks who are not your real life partners, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so one thing can be, I was Susie, and in this game, my partner was Cecilia.
Mhm.
Um, and in real life, I'm Mari, and I don't have a partner, right? Or something like that to sort of because when you are immersed in the role play, not only for your own feelings, you and Cecilia were playing, right? But other people's impressions of who you are, and
Mhm.
um, which can sometimes be messy and can sometimes lead to community issues and back
Oh,
channeling. And
yeah.
Mhm.
oh, Jessica has an anecdote.
I have too many anecdotes, and unfortunately, it's one where there is. If people know me, I can't even like change names to protect the innocent or guilty in this. It is so common. It's like it's almost a trope when it comes to the LARP romance that happens where it's either in character that bleeds into out of character and then there's an affair, or it's out of character and then mysteriously these two characters that have no reason to get romantic start getting romantic. It's happens a lot.
Mhm.
I'm laughing along because I'm dating a LARPer that I met 2 years ago at one of Mari's LARPs, and we talked a lot about that. Like, how do we handle this? And we're actually both going to a LARP in April, and it's my partner's regular LARP, and it's one that I'm going to kind of like as a one shot experience for me, and bringing some friends in, and we decided to like do completely separate things. I'm like, I'm not gonna come in with your group. I'm gonna do my own thing. This is your LARP, you know, but I want to play it and see why you're so hype about it. And he really wants me to experience it and like understand it. So we're doing two completely like separate things. I'm rolling in with my own group. I'm sure we'll like vaguely interact versus like, hey, you know, the next time he shows up as the original character that I met him as, it's going to be some kind of like big, huge dramatic scene or something.
Yeah.
So planning and communicating those expectations is really important, and the reasons for them, that you feel that way, and you know what you want to be obligated to have or not have. And the other thing I want to say about the kind of the role playing romance, because I do that a lot, and it doesn't, people, I feel like people automatically assume if you're role playing romance that there's like this huge like bedroom component involved just because you're role playing an intense romance. I think the most intense romance that I've ever role played was actually the one I did at Pandemonium, which was like everything was completely in public, and the most physically that happened was holding hands. And the assumption that there's so much more there creates a lot of you know, like out of game drama sometimes. It invalidates people who don't experience sexual attraction in real life, and it kind of invalidates the power of that romantic role play. And all this really to say is that the communication as part of that planning and debriefing process is important. And when I play out a romantic relationship, it's pre-planning with the other person, and then if that person isn't my partner, I like fill my partner in. I'm like, this is the plan, you cool? And then he's like, yeah, I'm cool. Then the role play happens, and then I debrief with the other person, and then I also do a little debrief with my partner, and that works out really well, just for anybody that is kind of looking and engaging in that sort of play and worried about how that might change or bleed over. And I'll say the first big romance that I role played was about 10 hours of planning, and really getting into like, well, you know, what are we comfortable with? What are the possibilities with the characters? What are the outcomes? And then it was, you know, a 4-day LARP. And then I think that we'd probably debriefed with each other maybe 3 or 4 hours total. So we actually did the planning and debriefing more than we did any kind of like interaction with each other at the actual LARP. And we were both playing leadership roles too at some point. So it was like we were on opposite sides of the campus too. But that communication made it pretty seamless, really easy. And I feel like it eliminated a large amount of the bleed. And for me, and I wish I could, people ask me how I do this, and I wish there was a way I could kind of describe it. But for me, when I role play relationships with someone that I'm not actually in a relationship with, the bleed is very like friendshipy. So it's like, now you're like my buddy, you know, like now you're like more of an ally to me. And I really remain like super open to that kind of bleed. But it involves so much one-on-one debrief long after the LARP is over, long after any structured debrief, you know. And I actually prefer not to be in a structured debrief right after the LARP with the romantic role play partner. I prefer to like have our separate thing and then follow up later. And that's another strategy that's kind of helped me there too.
Well, let's face it, debriefing is not really once and done. Like when we start talking about debriefing, I think it's hugely important that LARP organizers make space for it at the end of a LARP, like consider it part of the design and make time and space for it. So even if it's a 2-hour LARP, give yourself 20 minutes at the end for some people to just sort of chat with each other. It's 4-day LARP, you get 4 hours, right? Or something that are, that's time. But it's incorrect to assume that, okay, now we've debriefed, so turn off your fields, right? It's all done. Debriefing is a process. And so one thing that it's important, and as Tara said, people have different ways of doing it. Some people are not ready to talk about it at all at the close of the LARP because like their feelings are super muddied and they actually haven't realized certain things. Like, I mean, unfortunately, this is a parallel to sexual assault, right? In the sexual assault, like immediately after a sexual assault, most people don't. A lot of people don't want to recognize that they don't know what's happened, right? And it's not until later that they go, wait, because they've compartmentalized things, or they
Mhm.
rationalize things, or they
I
just.
find that validating because I feel like it's normal in the LARP debrief process to realize a lot of things later, to analyze,
Mhm.
to interpret, to remember even things that I didn't immediately after the LARP. And
Mhm.
only after that was I able to kind of reevaluate some negative experiences in either just, random interactions, friendships, relationships, or abuse situations where like I thought about it later, I remembered it later, I felt intensely about it later, or I realized how wrong and unjust it was long
Mhm.
years after the fact. And I was like, no, that's still valid because like look at my experiences at this LARP. Even with this positive emotion, I realized those feelings later.
Mhm.
So again, the person who was dating somebody they met 2 years ago at a LARP, it's valid to look back and be like, maybe there was a thing, there was something there, right?
Mhm.
And that does translate well to real life experiences and negative experiences where you can look back and say, yeah, like now that I'm thinking about it more objectively, that was a really unhealthy relationship. Or, man, that experience, like for example, my
Mhm.
mom just brought up a memory with me where we went to the beach one day and took a selfie on the beach when I was visiting her in Florida. And I hadn't really like thought much about that day, but apparently like it meant a lot to her. And it kind of like resurfaced, and she was like, "Oh, I forgot about this, but it was a really pleasant memory." And that's just how the human brain, I
Mhm.
guess, works. And it's completely valid to do that. And I think Mari's point is totally there. Like LARP really reinforces and validates that when you're doing the debrief work.
Mhm.
We try to have debriefing buddies, or somebody that you can reach out to um, after the LARP, right? Somebody who was
Mhm.
at the LARP. Some people debrief with people who weren't at the LARP too, and that's also totally valid. But
Mhm.
that thing I was talking about earlier about people who already have a baseline of I was there, are often easier to debrief with. Um, but the romance, I just want to say one more thing about that, which is, unfortunately, we should have a whole episode, by the way, guys,
Oh
about romance.
gosh.
Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day.
We needed one on romance, and we need one on antagonism because I got
Yeah,
stories. Yeah, that was about
Yeah.
yeah.
very, very true. But one of the things that people worry about after being in a LARP and having an intense experience is sorting out those various feelings. And especially if you've LARPed a romance, it can be awkward afterward, because then you're not sure, like, you're like, oh, the person says, oh, I was really into you. And you're like, are you talking about me? Are you talking about my character? Right. And so, like, I've been in LARPs where I was playing a spinster, and 4 hours later, I was being proposed to by the vicar, right? And boy, like, proposal scenes in LARP, those are really weird, right? Like,
Mhm.
someone asking you to marry them, and they're down on one knee, and maybe it was even or whatever, maybe it's even more romantic than something that happened to you in real life. I mean, there's all
Mhm.
kinds of things, and you say yes, maybe you say no, but whatever, you like. In this case, I agreed to marry this person in character, and then, like, 30 minutes later, we're like, ha ha ha, let's,
Mhm.
go to the lobby. And then I'm like, I want to be friends with this person after the LARP. They're a nice person, but like, we just went through this whole romantic thing, like debriefing.
Yeah,
Really,
defining
yeah,
that.
we need to,
Yeah.
like, I said yes to you. That was the spinster who was also an alcoholic saying yes, to the vicar. Um, and if you've done that with like your actual real life romantic partner in the room, like, you're like, hey, I just said I was gonna marry you.
Yeah, so like Mari, here's a question for you. Would you say that defining or redefining your um any type of relationship with the person you just played a romantic relationship with is a part of the debriefing process, or is that like a separate conversation?
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's part of de-rolling and debriefing, but I think it should be explicit,
Mhm.
right? Don't just talk about around it, right? Like, okay, I'm Mari, you know, you're John, whatever, and uh, that was a great role play experience that we had. Thank you for being such a, such a great vicar, and my character, was really, was happy that she was going to marry the vicar, right? Like started to talk about things in third person,
Mhm.
right? And those sorts of things. And I appreciate that we had this experience together, but yeah, like defining those real world boundaries can be super important. And I think should be part of debriefing, or de-rolling really in this case, right? Debriefing is more talking about
I
how.
also want to say, I just kind of to throw it out there because people are hearing me talk about like these wonderful experiences I've had playing romances at LARPs. I've also been very fortunate that I just happened to end up role playing the scenes with very communicative, very generous, very detail oriented people who kind of like did the work and kind of did everything
Mhm.
well. And how did I fall into that? I think it was because I like just chose safer communities.
Mhm.
Nothing's ever going to be 100% safe
Yeah.
guaranteed, but I think being, putting myself in the right communities really helped me connect with people who were considerate and aware of their own feelings and able to communicate. And for me, like the both of those big romances I described happened like initially unplanned. So
Mm,
like all the planning I talked about with the first one, that was after our characters had already met at one event and then we went to another event together. That was like, those unplanned things you kind of have to go at a character and do some negotiation. And I find that those unplanned romances are
Mhm.
the ones that actually require a lot more debriefing because you weren't ready for it. You didn't like
Mhm.
structure it. Or in my case, I wasn't even playing a character who was like remotely a good pick for a love interest, and yet there she was.
Mhm.
So I think that the debrief and the de-rolling and that separation in a romance is really important especially when it isn't planned.
Mhm.
to tag on that, I played an End of the Line, the vampire LARP,
Mhm.
and so I was in Finland. I was in, Helsinki, Finland, and that LARP has some horrible characters. Yeah, they're written to be horrible, right? Like there's a group that are like three pickup artists, right? And everybody's in this particular LARP. Everybody is. My character was super into like getting super high and having sex with anyone, right? And I had an encounter with a person who was a uh, get him to bed and get out of there guy, right? And so like we had an encounter where this person role played basically screwing my character on the side of the bar and then like, hightailing it. And 4 hours later, this person's like seeking me out to go, hey, I am this person and I would never do that.
Yeah.
And I actually felt really bad. And I want to make sure that you're okay because we role played me just, objectifying you and abandoning you in the corner of this, dance club. And I was like, I was okay because my character was I was very separated, right? My character was like, yep, that's what I do, but it was super important for that debriefing moment because first of all, we were playing bad. Like this guy was playing a behavior that was disgusting to him, right? And he wanted to make sure that I was okay, and also to be like, that's not me, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I debriefing is important. De-rolling and debriefing is important for that too, because
Mhm.
I didn't know him, right? I mean, if that's the only encounter that I have with this person, I'm gonna potentially conflate
Mhm.
that character with the real world identity.
And
And
the
Yeah.
expectations role are also really interesting because if you don't know the person beforehand out of game and your only context for who they are is that character,
yep,
there's a real interesting exploration as you become friends of like what part of that is you and what part of that is the character. And like because I see my LARP characters as like different aspects of who I am,
Mhm.
and that actually makes some people really uncomfortable.
yeah,
It makes me really comfortable because I can like embrace all these cool parts. I've
Mhm.
got like, the one that's crying in the corner and the total badass, and like that's just how it is. And you
Have
know,
you ever role played something that's absolutely not anything like who you are?
I think that would be almost impossible because you have to have like some experience or some fragment that you can identify with. Otherwise, it's going to feel fake.
Mm.
challenge accepted.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a we should write that down. We should do an episode on that too.
Oh
Yeah,
gosh.
I'm up for it because I find myself playing either that like my college self, I call her, or like the super tough and empowered, won't compromise on what justice means character. Those are like my two favorite archetypes, and I'm like, I'm here for something different. So, you
Hmm.
know, um, and I also my other archetype is like this tragic bleeding heart, usually in historical
Mm,
context, who like has the sadness and loss in their story. But hey, yeah, like that would be a good episode too. And that also plays into the de-rolling and that separation.
mm-hmm.
You know, like sometimes if especially if you play a close friendship or a romance with somebody and you're like, yeah, you know, like this character is different from me and it's a different person, but it's very much an aspect of me that can make somebody uncomfortable if they're like, you know, really attached to the character.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really weird thing, because in some ways it's like it can be positive to have that bleed, but if it's
Mm-hmm.
unwanted or you don't want relationships to cross boundaries, I mean, like I suppose that could be bad. Again, I just like please anybody watching, don't just like roll into a LARP and expect to have perfect relationship experiences. I think I just really lucked out and met some super nice people who are really good at communicating and separating and stuff. But yeah, like, you know, having that discussion about like, here's how the character is like me, here's how the character isn't like
Mm-hmm.
me. You know, Minerva would kill somebody, Tara generally would not.
Generally.
That
I
separation.
heard that too. I heard that too. That
Generally. So
unfortunately.
yeah, just so you know, D Marshall B's made a response in the chat. Yes, I could use advice on how to escape my three archetypes. So I think we have an idea for an episode a little bit later down the line.
Yay, January.
Yay, January.
Uh,
So you both of you have mentioned some stuff, and we kind of like danced on it before jumping into a slight tangent. But I think that um, the whole process of de-rolling and debriefing would be beneficial for a lot of the campaign competitive style LARPs that are out there. I'm already seeing people nodding because what ends up happening is it's supposed to be friends or at least people that you mostly tolerate out of game. And now you're playing characters that are in a zero sum situation where there's power dynamics and it's screw your neighbor or just even try to outlast them. And sometimes people will be pretty cutthroat and assholish in the process. And then afterwards you have to reconcile, like,
hey, it's all
which one is this? Is the jerk that I just dealt with for 4 hours the real persona, or is it the person who plays nicey nice and tries to chat about LARP and like random topics at coffee or at like the afters or whatnot? And it's like if we don't have that if we don't have that ability to split, I can definitely see it where friendships start to like fade or even become antagonistic because it's like, how dare you do that to me? I mean, my character, but me sort of deal.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's
I know, I'm just
just-
like,
it's
Who
like,
wants
I
to touch
must.
that one?
Hey, I turned off, I stopped it focusing on me, so I went to wherever the noise was.
I,
um,
I'm just gonna say I wish it would happen more,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'd be really open to working with anybody at a campaign LARP, or like maybe even like bartering some services with anybody at campaign LARP who might want to look into implementing that kind of thing. If it's a matter of like resource management or I need help or I don't know how to do this, because like it's really really healthy, and there's a lot of good informal debriefing going on at campaign LARPs, which is great, but I think a lot of them could benefit from even like a half an hour workshop with some structure. And that's, I'll leave it there. I wish that more would embrace it.
Oh,
Oh,
I completely agree in this, and I'm in a 60-person Werewolf the Apocalypse LARP where we call game wrap at 11:30, and we're supposed to be out by midnight. So
mhm.
we only have enough time to go through and do player nods, and then people will either go to Perkins afterwards where they talk about game or they go home. So there really isn't that de-rolling or debriefing process either way unless it's self-implemented. Like I will go through and actually take my jewelry off as my way of being able to shut down, but there's still people there who are energized and they'll take that over to whether it's Facebook or the
Mm,
meet up afterwards and they will keep people riled up and they'll keep themselves riled up. And sometimes it can get toxic.
all this, yes. In short LARPs as well. This is why the break is so important, I think. Partially because in those kinds of competitive LARPs, which in those situations where you are concerned that another person that you're interacting with might be doing something to try to harm you or to trick you or to lie to you or to get you to betray you or
Mhm.
get you to do something that will cause your character harm or death. Um, Turning off those hackles, right? The sense of betrayal, the sense of,
Mhm.
"Can I trust you?" Turning that off to then trust actually be friends with or community members with this person is quite difficult to do, in which case the de-rolling or that break can be a way to help make me go, "Okay, wait, I don't have to worry that you're going to kill me." Um, because I'm looking at you, you've taken off the thing, you are now, uh,
Mhm.
you as a person. Second, unfortunately, the phrase, "It wasn't me, it was my character,"
Uh.
uh,
Uh,
has been used in a weaponized manner
a lot.
to justify very, very bad and harmful and hurtful and in some cases abusive and harassing behavior. So while in the case that I was describing of End of the Line, where the guy was coming up to me afterward to go, "It
Mhm.
wasn't me, it was my character," right? In an off game debriefing sort of way to say, "Look, are you okay? I needed to do that because the LARP called for it, right? And this was
Mhm.
the way with my character. I hope everything is all right because I would never do that." That's very different than, "Sorry you felt bad about that. It wasn't me, it was my character."
Mhm.
Right? So the notion of I am not that bad person, that maybe if we're being super generous, at the heart of it wasn't me, it was my character, but it's the way it's held that way where it's defensive
Mhm.
and justify versus if we had debriefing could do it in a healthy way to say, "Oh gosh, yeah, I can see why you're upset about that. My character was a real jerk to you,"
Mhm.
right? Do you have did that affect you personally? Now let's talk about it as people, right?
Mhm.
So debriefing can actually do this in a healthy way rather than in a defend my actions way, and how dare you have
Mhm.
feelings about way.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question on that. If something happens in game and it makes a player, like let's say I'm the player and I feel disempowered
Mhm.
out of game as a result of that, even if I consented to it, and then we're debriefing and I express to maybe the both of you are in the scene with me, hey, I think that scene went really well and I know we planned it and I consented to everything and I was good with it when we were role playing, but now that we're done and debriefing, I'm having negative feelings, and I feel like it removed a lot of power from my character, and I'm having some bleed there, and I feel really disempowered as a
Mhm.
person. It makes me feel great. Like, where do I go with that?
I think you have to acknowledge that those
Yeah.
feelings are very, very real.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's why that defensive thing is so hard because it's a natural human response, right? Like you're
Yep.
telling me these things, and Jessica might be like, "But that wasn't our intention at all." And oh my god,
I'll talk about my response in a moment.
yes, sorry. But you know how people will defend themselves often and just be like, "Wait, what? No, I thought you consented. Like, what? You know, you can." Whereas, like, people need to really listen in those situations and to be able to say your feelings about that are valid. And um, you don't have to apologize in my view, right? But you have to say, yeah, that's intense, and we did that together, and um, how do you think we got there? Let's talk about it, right? Let's
Mhm.
talk through it. But that deflection moment is, I guess for me, that's doubling down in a way that's not healthy, right? Like you're sitting there being vulnerable and saying these sorts of things, and if you just go, well, why are you feeling that, right? Because
Mhm.
it was your character, and we agreed to.
All that would make me feel is
Yeah.
more invalidated and
Mhm.
disempowered.
Exactly, exactly. So it's really hard, but I think you have to separate yourself from the sense of blame, right?
Mhm.
It's not like you're blaming me, even if my character's actions caused it.
Mhm.
Like
Right.
like saying that is not the same as blaming me and me needing to feel like
Mhm.
I am massively responsible, but I'm a part of it, and so I should I should empathize and work through it with you.
Mhm. Yeah. My philosophy on it is when it comes to these types of LARP experiences, we are the co-creators of that experience. So when talking about if I was approached on that, I mean, emotionally, I would feel like a little defensive and I would feel like shit because of like, oh crap, I caused emotional. I would see it almost as emotional harm to someone, and it would, even though it was unintentional, I would still feel bad about it. So I mean, I would acknowledge, yes, you're hurt. And yes, I engaged in a situation that led to it, even though we made all these precautions, even though there was consent there were after effects, and I'm sorry for that after effect.
Mhm,
And then instead of launching straight into let's talk about it now, I would basically extend an invitation to talk about, all right, well, what led to us getting to that point emotionally? Um, and what can we do to prevent that from happening again? I don't want
mhm,
to going back and saying, well, why didn't you tell me or how did you not know about that feels almost victim blamey. So I don't really want to go that route, but I would want to go towards, all right, what can we do to empower you so you don't have to feel that again?
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
and that has a parallel in the kink community, Jess, when they do that, when you have a debriefing after a
Hmm.
scene, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
'Cause it's like, what went well? What didn't work so well? Oh, I felt this, and, so how can we improve that next time, right?
Hmm.
Um, and, um And and absolutely not, 'cause I've seen, unfortunately, too many times people going, "Well, you had safety tools and you didn't use them, and since you didn't cut and
You didn't use the safe word.
you didn't use the safe word, right, then how was I supposed to know, right?"
Uh-huh.
And so that is in very much like putting it right back on the person who, at that moment, either couldn't access the safe word or didn't even process yet that they needed the safe word because these things can happen so fast. So, I mean, I really think that's part of the reason why King has aftercare and that moment of
Hmm.
talking about it, which often, a lot of times after, let's talk a little bit about that. Aftercare and debriefing are, it's kind of two different things in the sense that aftercare is often you've had an intense experience,
Hmm.
right? Let's drink water. Let's maybe get a blanket, right? Let's have some cuddles or some hugs, or
Yeah.
um, let's deal with sort of physical things that maybe can get you to a space where you can actually intellectualize, analyze,
Hmm.
process, and those sorts of things. And so they really, really go hand in hand, and it brings to that problem that you're talking about. Both Jess and Tara brought up earlier, which is there's just not enough time, right? I
Hmm.
mean, Jess is
Mhm.
saying, "Well, we have 30 minutes, then we have to pack up and get out of there." And then who's going to really talk about some of these really emotionally vulnerable
And
things to a
that's
person?
Yeah.
that's self-care and aftercare. I think also sometimes we forget that that's for everybody who participated if they want
Hmm.
that, not just for like somebody who was vulnerable or someone who was hurt, or I guess
Hmm.
in a like a kink scene, somebody who was submissive. Like if you play an intense character or an intense role,
Hmm.
like you might need that even more than somebody, who played
Hmm.
another type of role.
I very much wanted to segue there, so yes,
Yeah.
please wait.
Yeah, go for it. Take it,
Go
because
it. Go, go.
Um, well, yeah, a lot of times people think about the vulnerable one, or the sub, or the bottom,
Hmm.
or the person who experienced the abuse. Whereas, like in that example that I gave of the guy at the end of the line, who was needed to debrief because he was horrified that he was like
Mhm.
capable of this behavior that he considers horrible. Well, okay, let's not say consider, that is horrible,
Yeah.
right? Right? And B, inflicted that upon another in an acting situation, right? So playing antagonists, playing villains, playing people who have to do things where they exploit power dynamics,
Mhm.
right? All of those sorts of things. In many, many, many cases, those people need more debriefing than the people who consented to the other because they first of all they were doing horrible things
Yep.
and they're worried that they've hurt someone. And second, they're dealing with the fact that they had the capacity to do that, right? Which
Mhm.
is a second level of right. Oh
I'm
my.
like, I'm
Yeah.
already there with some things, with some scenes that I have planned for Yule, which is in December. I'm already there of like, why do I want to do that? Like, and it's not even anything that's like physical, but it's just like, why do I want to role play a scene where I'm like damaging someone's mind? Like, that's really messed up. Like, I'm regaining a lot of control in my own life, so why do I still have this like really like almost like excitement over like role playing that? And I'm like, maybe it's because I want it's not that I want like to dominate somebody else's mind or their actions. It's like, this character, um she might not have the best methods, right? But I feel like for me as a player, it's more about like, okay, that it's the trust. It's like having that there is like important to me. Having that trust with the other role player, having the ability to explore that. Somebody letting me explore that is really
Mhm.
like I really value and respect that a lot. And it's weird, and that's like a thing you can think about before. Because if
Mhm.
I left myself to think about what is with me that I really want to do that until after the scene, I think that would really mess me up. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to think about it now and like, why do I want to do that? What am I looking to get out of this? What does the other person need?
Mhm.
What are their limits? That kind of stuff.
Well, let's face it, stories need villains and stories need antagonists
Yeah.
and people who are exploring the how they might resist power authority and all
Mhm.
those things need someone to be the power authority,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so there's two things that are going on there. One is you're serving, right? Like let's think about this. The in a king situation, right? The
Mhm.
top is really serving the bottom, right? Even though the right. So you are serving the story. You are playing, doing something for others, which is helpful, but also hard.
Mhm.
Second, there's a rush. There is a rush that comes from being having people submit to you, right?
Mhm.
Having being the one who is being powerful and dealing with that. This is part of what I was talking about, right? Dealing with the that felt good. Oh, that was horrible, right?
Yeah.
Sort of thing is part of
Mhm.
what debrief is for, because you were doing something that's not good, but in the moment you also had a rush of satisfaction from
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
powerful, right?
Mhm.
um, and reconciling that can be super super hard, and that's one of the other reasons I think debrief is really really important.
Definitely. Well, we're getting to the top of the hour. Was there anything else we wanted to discuss on this topic?
I think we've done a pretty good job with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, the only thing I want to kind of reiterate is the structured and unstructured options that you
Mhm.
have, especially when it comes to debriefing. Because I didn't even, like I said, I didn't even know that structured debriefing was a thing. And I didn't even know that a 2 hour car ride home with my best friend after our
Mhm,
campaign LARP, where we
Mhm.
talked all about the LARP, all about the LARP, all about the LARP, was unstructured debriefing
mhm.
and vital to like being able to function at work on Monday.
I think I'd like to add that while I very, very much believe strongly that you should make time for structured debriefing at the event,
Mhm.
that you should not require it. That it should be opt out, like it's an expectation that you should try to participate. Same
Mhm.
as with ink. But if you can't for reasons that are personal, that should not be. that should not be questioned. It should not be shamed. It should not be any of those things. You should say debriefing is important. I hope you have the opportunity to debrief informally, right, with your friends or with others. But I'm not going to force you to sit here
Yeah.
and do
And
because that is
that's
problematic.
important in one-on-one too,
Yeah.
because there is another romance I didn't really go into that happened between two characters, and I'm pretty sure the other player and myself thought it went pretty well. I still wanted a little more debrief after the LARP, kind of reached out to them, was like, hey, can we kind of talk about this and tie this up in a neat little bow? And they were like, I'm not really there. And at a point where I can talk about it, I was like, oh, that's cool. We'll check in later. And the other person was never actually really comfortable with fully talking about it for whatever reason. And I kind of had to accept, okay, that's okay. This character is still my character, and I can choose another way to resolve it after 6 plus months of not knowing what happened. I'm like, I can pick another way to sort of resolve it. And then also happened with one of my characters' platonic relationships too. Like, she didn't get closure with something, and a whole bunch of players were tied to that, or a whole bunch of characters were tied to that character, and we kind of collectively decided, okay, for us to like in and out of game feel healthy, we need to move on. How do we collectively decide that we do that? Like, instead of forcing these other people to like talk about something or be uncomfortable, it's just not right. But we still had the right to like manage our own emotions and our characters' experiences and move on.
You used a word there that we haven't used yet that I think is very important and also potentially apropos after an hour, which is closure, right? And one of the things that de-rolling and debriefing really does is provide that sense of closure, right? Like the de-rolling says, I'm not the character, I am myself. And the debriefing helps us get to that space where we can put the experience into a cognitive sorting and close it and leave it to then begin to move forward into our regular daily lives.
That's true. And don't think that just because you're playing a campaign bot for LARP that your experiences don't deserve a debrief or that you're not being immersed. Like, some of the most immersive experiences I've had are while I'm freaking out in the middle of a battlefield, channeling and using all these like complicated rules that sometimes maybe feel not so immersive, but I was like in the zone. When you channel and count healing for 30 minutes consecutively without stopping, like, it's a trance, right? Like, it
pretty much.
Yeah. And I've realized, since then that was like just as deserving as any other experience I've had, if not more. Like, I needed that debrief. I would have benefited a lot more from a structured debrief, personally, for that kind of game. But I'm really glad I had the informal debrief and that 2-hour car ride home.
I want to think just to close is that, let's think a little bit about sports teams too. Like, we're talking about that competitive thing, right? So you finish a game, and what the coaches, when you were thinking about when you were a kid or whatever, right? They made you line up and go through and like high five or whatever, congratulate the winning team, because you needed to process your feelings and to like sort of put it in the past and to do something positive about it. But also then like your coach gets you together at the end of the team, and there's the locker room talk, right? Or the thing where there's a chance to sort of process through some of those feelings. You had feelings of adrenaline, you had feelings of competitiveness, you had feelings of I made a great play, and you had feelings of I made a big fumble and I feel really bad about it, and you had feelings of we won, or feelings of we lost, or if just or even upsetness at somebody else, right? Like, I played really well and you over there did something, and that's really part of what caused us to lose, right? And so if you think about it in those sense of those sports things, right, where they don't let everybody just go home after the game before they have a chance to at least a little bit talk. Right.
All right. Well, it looks like when we talked about closure, we are at a great closing time. So again, I want to thank everyone who's was watching us live, and for those of you who are watching us on YouTube, we're actually on Twitch TV every other Wednesday at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So our next one is going to be on November 7th. And if I remember correctly, that is on, what was it, LARP convention or LARP event planning?
Mhm.
Yeah, LARP conventions.
Yeah, I think we have special guests, Lori Rich, who was one of the organizers for BCon in
Mhm.
Chicago, and Dave Capel, who's the chairman for New England Interactive Literature, which puts on Intercon Conference,
Yeah,
which is
if
in its
you
20th year, I think.
Mhm.
yeah, and if you head over to facebook.com/LARPChatLive, I just put the event up before we went live tonight, so you can go ahead and RSVP. Get a
Yay!
reminder. Yay!
Yay!
Excellent.
All right. So again, thank you all for being here and being an awesome community, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Thanks all.